Adolf Eichmann, SS officer and war criminal, was imprisoned in Israel for 2 years while undergoing investigation and trial. In his prison memoirs, kept secret for 40 years, he declared,
"What I believed in is buried under the rubble. I shall tell of the genocide of the Jews as it happened, and I shall add to it my reflections of yesterday and today. I not only had to see the killing fields with my own eyes, but I saw things that were much worse. It was the greatest and most terrible dance of death of all times. I saw it, and I describe it all as a warning."
Unexpected words from a devout Nazi. Had Eichmann changed his views since the war? A few years earlier, in 1957, while a fugitive in Argentina, he told Dutch Nazi journalist Willem Sassen,
Ostdistrikt Lublin, Treblinka Fragezeichen. Einen Obersturmführer war der Lagerleiter. Es war ein kleines Lager. Wie die vernichtet haben, das weiß ich nicht. Nicht mit Gas.
What is true? What is false? Who was the real Adolf Eichmann?
We prepared a film, a documentary film. I prepared a film for 45 minutes to present to the court. Now, out of fairness to the defense, before we presented that in court, I wanted him and his lawyer to see that films. So we brought him into the courtroom and we showed him that film. And I wanted to, I mean, I knew the film, but I wanted to see how he reacted. It was completely impassive.
The city of the living dead. Human beings reduced to worse degradation than the world has known, even in the darkest age. Sick and old persons and pregnant women went straight to the gas chamber. Everything at Auschwitz was done with hideous precision. Even the victims' shoes were heaped in storage sheds.
Suddenly he spoke in a very excited manner to the warden. Yes, he said that he had been brought into the courtroom in his gray suit. And he had been promised that he would never be taken to the courtroom where other people were present without wearing his blue suit. And they shouldn't promise him a thing like that if they can't keep that promise. And he had to protest vehemently about being brought into the courtroom in his gray suit. That was troubled him, you know, when he saw these frightful pictures about the death camps. That was the only thing that disturbed him.
In the summer of 1941, Reinhard Heydrich, head of Reich Security, began preparations for the annihilation and murder of the entire Jewish population of Europe. The location for the unveiling of the design for genocide was a small luxury villa just outside Berlin, on the shore of Lake Wannsee, and used by the SS for weekend retreats. Here, in this tranquil spot, on the 20th of January 1942, Heydrich assembled 15 of the Nazis' top hierarchy, most vital to his scheme. The meeting was held in strict secrecy. Now they were approaching the real goal. Eichmann had been involved from the start and came as a representative of the Gestapo. He had also sent out the invitations, adding,
"This is a meeting of extraordinary importance, and we must achieve a common view."
Eichmann organized the Wannsee Conference together with Heydrich, and they decided that the time had come to inform all the various functionaries and the director generals of the various ministries of the final solution, that the idea was to kill all Jews. And there was some trepidation before. They were fearful, Heydrich and Eichmann. I mean, some of these people were lawyers, some of these German officials in the various ministries, and they thought there might be some objection to this criminal scheme of murdering, of killing millions of people.
After a brief dinner, Heydrich read a speech drafted by Eichmann, in which he expressed praise for the Einsatzgruppen killings in Russia. But those had just been a stopgap solution. This was about the systematic and methodical plan to murder every Jew in Europe. The protocol laid out the number of Jews to be seized in each country. Over 2 million in the eastern territories of Poland, 330,000 in England, 4,000 in Ireland, and 5 million in the Soviet Union. Total, 11 million Jews. Now the crux of the matter. Did anybody object?
And then the evening came, and there was no objection to the whole idea of the final solution in this sinister sense. So after the people had left, Eichmann and Heydrich sat before a log fire and drank brandy. That's what Eichmann said, because they were so delighted that everything had gone off so smoothly.
The mood was ecstatic. Because of the seclusion of the villa, everyone felt free to talk openly and enthusiastically about killing and annihilation. At his trial, Eichmann tried to distance himself from the euphoria, but admitted Wannsee was about murder.
Gebeten, ein Glas Cognac zu trinken oder 2 oder 3. So kam das.
Also vielleicht entsinnen Sie sich, was man da gesprochen hat.
Da sind die verschiedenen Tötungsmöglichkeiten besprochen worden.
Verschiedene Tötungsmöglichkeiten?
Jawohl.
Deception and preparation for murder were the themes of Wannsee. The policy of secrecy and deception was also used in regard to the Theresienstadt ghetto, which was administered by Eichmann's office.
Heydrich asked me how we could clean Bohemia of the Jews. I said we must put aside a city with a lot of reserve land at the disposal of the problem. Thus, the city of Theresienstadt was emptied of its civilians. In addition, Himmler gave orders for Theresienstadt to be transformed into a model ghetto to show foreigners.
The local inhabitants of the small Czech town were evacuated from their houses to make space for the expected flood of Jewish deportees. Netrovian was then 11 years old. The cellar of his house was turned into a synagogue. Eichmann invited journalists and foreign groups to visit, to try and cover up the murder of the European Jews. Life in Theresienstadt was supposed to be an example of what was happening in the rest of the camps. The few letters which were sent from the camp praised its running, but the reality was very different. During 1942, 16,000 people died from disease and hunger.
אנחנו חיינו על 70 סנטימטר של המיטה. הפשפשים והקנים, לא רק קנים בשרות, הקנים בגוף, אכלו אותנו. התנאים ההיגייניים היו נוראים. הזקנים מתו מרעב. כל בוקר עברה עגלה, רק עגלה ככה, פלטפורמה עם 4 גלגלים שאספו את המתים מתוך הבתים.
Illusion and pretense became a way of life. As part of the deception masking the real horrors, Himmler ordered a propaganda film to be made that showed a town of smiling harmony. When the Red Cross delegations arrived, they were shown a village that seemed well-ordered, happy, and well-run.
אייכמן היה אחראי על זה של הביקורת של צלב האדום בזמנו שהגיע לטרזינשטט, ואנחנו כולנו עמדנו ושפשפנו את הבתים ואת הרחובות כדי שהצלב האדום יחשוב שהולך לנו כל כך טוב, שפתחו פתאום גני ילדים וחילקו פרוסות לחם עם חמאה.
Miroslav Kani saw Eichmann in Theresienstadt during one of these Red Cross visits.
Ve skutečnosti tam byl Eichmann, zástupci německého Červeného kříže. A to byla taková jako prohlídka, která měla jako uklidnit, prostě posloužit té propagandě. V oběd byl 2 dny předtím dobrý a 2 dny potom už ne tedy, ale prostě celá ta komedie toho Frscheneru.
Red Cross officials were shown football tournaments, taken through the library and invited to watch classical concerts. But once the Red Cross officials left, reality took over. At the end of the filming, all the crew and the participants were sent to the east to be killed. Eichmann had previously been the expert in charge of forced emigration. Now he was the expert roundup man. Eichmann's assistants, who'd been with him for years, Dieter Wisliseny, Theodor Dannecker and Alois Brunner, would now be sent all over Europe. A massive job of coordination was assigned to Eichmann. His task was twofold: organize and collect the Jews, then transport them to the death camps. The Transport Ministry had to be contacted, timetables consulted, collection points defined, trains allocated.
כעבור כמה ימים אנחנו מקבלים הודעה בגטו שאותו אדולף אייכמן עומד לבקר בגטו.
Almost half a century after appearing as a witness at the Eichmann trial, Ziv Sapir still recalls vividly his journey to Auschwitz. How Eichmann watched as he and his family left on a journey from which his parents never returned.
עבור יום, הופיע אדולף אייכמן. וראינו אותו, הוא נראה חזק, ראו עליו. לבוש במדי אס-אס, ירוקים, ואיתו קצינים.
שאלה אחת עכשיו, שב בבקשה, ובכל זאת...
היינו כולנו כך במרכז בצורת חטא, והוא התחיל לנאום. אם לנאום, אני מוכרח לומר לכם ביידיש. ביידיש כפי שאנחנו דיברנו, ידע את השפה היידיש על בוריה. ואמר, יהודים יקרים, אתם עכשיו הולכים למקום יפה מאוד, טוב מאוד, ילדיכם ילמדו בבתי ספר, אתם תעבדו במשך היום, בערב תחזרו, יהיה לכם נעים וטוב, אתם תחיו חיי משפחה טובים, נהדרים וטובים מאוד. אנחנו האמנו, לא האמנו, ככה. אבל אולי בכל זאת, ישנה הישועה.
Eichmann was proud of his efficient system. Later, when he was a fugitive in Argentina, he told the Dutch Nazi journalist Willem Sassen,
"We had words for the concealment of annihilation, such as special treatment or expulsion to the east or the final solution of the Jewish question." What would have happened if the people sent on the trains knew for certain what was going to happen to them? No one besides those at the last stop knew what the real meaning of the words were. Only infrequently did they use the word kill.
Sometimes Eichmann was present at the railway depots to supervise the loading of the trains.
I remember a German officer standing at the railway station, looking at the train. Only much later, during the trial, that I realized that that man was Eichmann. He looked at us, and there was a kind of not remorse, but regret. Only later did I understand that he was sorry. He was sorry that he couldn't do it again. And he wanted to continue, actually, to deport more and more and more and more.
כעבור יום, ניתנה הוראה, והלכנו לתחנת הרכבת. בתחנת הרכבת, שם הרגשנו מה הולך להיות. היינו 103 נפשות. היינו צפופים, צפיפות בלתי נסבלת. ילדים קטנים, בוכים, צועקים, תינוקות. מאמה, וסר, וסר זה ביידיש מים. מאמה, אמא, מים. ואמא שרה להם, צועקת, שלוף מיין קינד, שם בני. ולא ידענו איפה אנחנו, לא ידענו.
Eichmann was very dismissive when talking about this to Sassen in 1957.
The operation was carried out with Prussian exactness about provision and transportation. The Jews were shipped in covered, not open cars, and always by the quickest routes. After all, we were supposed to bring the materials to the concentration camps ready to start work, not sickly and exhausted.
And the destinations of the trains? Murder camps. Belzec, Chelmno, Sobibor, Treblinka, Majdanek, Auschwitz-Birkenau.
הגענו, כעבור 3 ימים, הגענו לאושוויץ. הרגשנו ריח, ריח כזה של בשר חרוך. עמד שם רופא, ורק בתנועת יד קטנה, או ימינה או שמאלה, הוריי הלכו ימינה. לא הספקתי להיפרד מהם. אני הלכתי שמאלה. נפתחה דלת, וראינו גופות. ראיתי גופות, ככה גופות, אחת לשנייה. והגופות היו צמודות זו לזו. ופתאום התחילו ככה להתהפך, להתנוער. אמרו לנו, אנחנו צריכים את הגופות האלה להוציא לתוך בורות. היו שם בורות, אש. בבורות האלה גם שרפו שם גופות.
Besides sending Jews to the camps, Eichmann's office issued instructions on the fate of the prisoners and kept records of the annihilation. Eichmann visited Auschwitz to see for himself that everything was running smoothly. He told Sassen,
"In the spring of 1942, I received orders to go to Auschwitz and report on the means that the concentration camp commander was using on the Jews." Höss, the commandant of Auschwitz, explained to me that he was using cyanide for the killing. The gas was thrown in pellets into the cells in which the Jews were concentrated.
Eichmann saw the killings, but never felt responsible. He cared only about details, not the overall picture.
What happened exactly, or was going to happen with the transport from such and such, whether the people being transported were going to be killed, or whether they would remain in a concentration camp, none of the involved authorities knew any details. Similarly, I never knew anything myself.
By September 1942, the war was completing its third year. Meanwhile, carrying out the final solution proceeded at a frenetic pace. Now Eichmann concentrated on the big transportations from Western Europe.
In every European country under our jurisdiction, it was the job of the representative in my office to work through local officials until he had obtained our goal, a roundup of the Jews and their delivery to the transports. I carefully set up my timetables and the trains were rolling. But over the years we met many difficulties.
Eichmann thought France would provide few problems. He was wrong. On Eichmann's orders, thousands of Jews were rounded up. The first destination of the deportees was Wannsee detention camp, under the command of Eichmann's assistant, Alois Brunner. Cautious of French public opinion, Eichmann's plans moved slowly. The first train left France for Auschwitz in March 1942. At one point, Eichmann was asked to decide the fate of 4,000 children. His answer was decisive.
Children's transports can now get underway.
Their destination, the death camps. But in his memoirs, Eichmann wrote,
"At this time, I myself had 3 little children. I don't want to say any more at this time."
Last commander of the Auschwitz death camp, Rudolf Höss, he wrote amongst that sometimes they had to kill 1,000 children a day. And the children used to kneel down sometimes and ask to be saved. And when he had to push the children into the gas chambers, his knees were getting a bit wobbly sometimes. And then he adds, "But I always felt ashamed afterwards about this weakness of mine after I talked to Obersturmbannführer Adolf Eichmann, because Eichmann explained to me that it's especially the children who have to be killed first, because he thinks these new re-emergence of that race has to be prevented."
In the summer of 1942, Eichmann planned to move another 100,000, but French officials would not cooperate. And when a train arrived at Auschwitz half empty, Eichmann threatened the French that he would not clean France of its Jews. Angered at the difficulty of the deportations, he made frequent visits to Paris. The pace was too slow, the numbers too few. Talking of this to Sassen, he referred to himself in the third person, as the master.
Even when the master comes only twice a year, he is told all kinds of stories. The difficulties are blown out of proportion. In the end, one has to be grateful if one gets crumbs instead of the whole loaf. We managed after a struggle to get the deportations going. Trainloads of Jews were soon leaving France. Whether they were bank directors or mental cases, the people who were loaded onto these trains meant nothing to me. It was really none of my business.
הוא כעס מאוד שבצרפת, בפריז, לא יצאה הרכבת בזמן. זה לא קרה לי אף פעם, הוא אומר. הוא כעס, התנפל על הפקיד הזה שלו בצרפת. לגבי הולנד, לא הייתה בעיה כזאת, כי הוא אמר בעצמו במשפט, בהולנד זה היה אין פרחת, זה היה יוצא מן הכלל כמה הרכבות נסעו.
Dr. Joseph Melkman, born in Amsterdam, was present at a meeting of Jewish leaders when Eichmann brought in a Jew who'd worked with him in Prague. His purpose was to instruct the Dutch Jews in the Eichmann system.
אדלשטיין בא מפראג, ותפקידו היה ללמד את היהודים איך מקימים יודנראט ואיך צריכים לשתף פעולה עם הגרמנים. ושאמר לנו שהגרמנים רוצים להרוג אותנו, והוא התלונן שיהודי הולנד לא הבינו את חומרת המצב.
In Holland, the battle for the Jews was especially hard and bitter. The Dutch, for one thing, did not make a distinction between Dutchmen and Jews with Dutch citizenship. A person was either Dutch, they said, or he wasn't.
The Dutch Jews felt safe. For hundreds of years, they had enjoyed complete freedom and economic prosperity. Early in the occupation, the attempted arrest of 400 Jews in Amsterdam triggered a general protest strike involving trams, factories, shops, and shipyards. When thousands of Jews went into hiding, Eichmann offered special rewards for informers. For Eichmann, the individual mattered as much as the mass. As far as he was concerned, no one would escape his net. When the Dutch government attempted to exempt a few Jewish diamond experts from deportation, Eichmann wrote to headquarters,
"At this advanced stage, it is preposterous to let other agencies deal with police and security affairs."
When the German Foreign Ministry tried to save a few individual Jews for special reasons, Eichmann replied that for reasons of principle, the request could not be granted. Some Jews escaped, but many were shipped off to the death camps via Westerbrück. In Holland, the proportion of Jews killed in the Holocaust was to be the greatest in Europe. From over 110,000 sent to the camps, only 5,000 remained alive at the end of the war.
הממונים בהולנד היו אוסטרים כמוהו. אייכמן דרש 40,000 יהודים לגרש מהולנד, והם רצו להגיע ליותר מ-50,000 עד סוף השנה. ועל כן גם אייכמן אמר שבהולנד לא הייתה לו בעיות, ועל כן רכבות נסעו, זה היה יוצא מן הכלל.
Eichmann may have begun to feel he was racing against time. At Stalingrad, in bitter winds and heavy snows, the Germans attacked again and again, only to be driven back with heavy losses. It was clear to Eichmann his work had to be speeded up, and he traveled to Warsaw to take matters in hand. By the start of 1943, Eichmann had already sent 400,000 Jews from the Warsaw Ghetto to the death camps. 50,000 still remained in the ghetto. Every week, the transports left the Umschlagplatz opposite the Gestapo headquarters to Treblinka. Suspecting a final deportation, the ghetto rose in rebellion in mid-April.
שמו אנשים בשיירה, הקיפו אותה, בשוטרים יהודים, באוקראינים, בגרמנים, נשק, והמחתרת נכנסו לשיירה כזאת. ובדרך יצאו ופתחו באש נגד הגרמנים האלה. וכל השיירה הזאת התפזרה. ובאותו יום אני הייתי במקום הזה.
It was the beginning of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. On the 19th of April, 1943, Hitler's birthday was being celebrated in Berlin with concerts and other festivities. As congratulations were showered on Hitler in the capital, German forces entered the Warsaw Ghetto to deal with the uprising. They were met with fierce resistance. Fighting raged from house to house and from street to street. After 3 weeks of continuous fighting, the Germans set the ghetto on fire. As the flames spread, the resistance fighters jumped from buildings or fled underground to the sewers. By June, all was quiet. The Germans had lost over 1,000 troops. Eichmann was sent to inspect the damage.
I was shown the nests of resistance that had only been taken by concentrated charges. It was a hard fight. I seldom saw a place so destroyed as Warsaw. The uprising in the ghetto taught us a bitter lesson about putting an excessive number of people into these enclosures.
At the beginning of 1944, 800,000 Jews were living in Hungary in comparative calm, half of them in Budapest. Eichmann was now sent in person to deal with the Jews of Hungary, the last remaining untouched Jewish community in Europe. He later told Sassen,
"After years of working behind a desk, I had come out into the reality of the field. As my boss put it, they sent me, the master himself, to make sure the Jews didn't revolt as they had in the Warsaw Ghetto."
Eichmann had recruited a special force called the Eichmann Commando, which now followed the German divisions into Hungary. Eichmann immediately set up headquarters at the Hotel Majestic, overlooking Budapest. He wasted no time with his preparations. The deportations started in May. By July, over 400,000 Jews, half of Hungary's Jewish population, mostly from outside Budapest, had been sent to their deaths. In Auschwitz, Rudolf Höss, the commander of the camp, complained that the numbers were overwhelming him. Eichmann later recalled,
Höss told me he could not understand why I showed absolutely no consideration for him and his staff. But how could I?
Having worked so fast and efficiently, Eichmann now found he had plenty of time on his hands. In his prison memoirs, Eichmann wrote about his off-duty life.
People would find it hard to believe me if I said that during those last years, I never had so much leisure time and less to do than those months I spent in Budapest. In my private life, I was involved with motorsports and sailing. I also had many personal friends and a horse for riding.
The former salesman from Linz now had the most elegant of cars, a number of mistresses, and all the benefits of a great city. Eichmann was living the good life. He dined well, drank extensively, and enjoyed the comforts of his villa and surroundings on Rose Hill.
אייכמן היה תמיד, לא ראית על חיוך, ולא ידעת מה הוא חושב, זה היה בן אדם כאילו פסל.
Zev Kanarek, a Jew with blonde hair and the fake identity papers of an ordinary Hungarian, cooked daily for Eichmann in Budapest. He was present when Eichmann killed a boy in the Hotel Majestic.
הוטל מג'סטיק זה היה של יהודי, אגרונום מפורסם. כל הפירות שגודלים בהונגריה היה לו. אמרו לנו שיש פה פרי, אפרסקים ותפוחים, שזה רוצים לשלוח מתנה להיטלר. ושהביאו פה ילדים יהודים בשביל לנקות את העשבים. כשיצאו מהחצר, עשו להם חיפוש. ואצל הילד הזה מצאו איזה 14 או 12 אפרסקים. היה שם צעקות, אנחנו מתקרבים לחדר אוכל שלהם להכניס את האוכל, ואייכמן מרים איזה בול עץ ונותן מכה על הגב של הילד. אנחנו לא ידענו שבגלל מה זה. הילד נפל קיבל מכה ממדרגה ראשונה, מדרגה שנייה, פה בראש, נפתח לו המוח, ועל המקום מת. האפרסקים היו ירוקים, אי אפשר היה לאכול, עוד לא היה שווה שום דבר.
While Eichmann played in Budapest, the German war effort was gradually faltering. The Allies had landed at Normandy and were advancing across France. On the eastern borders, the Russians were increasing the pressure.
During the final stages of the war, when the German generals on the Eastern Front were clamoring for reinforcements and for ammunition, he, by trickery, managed to get priority for his death trains, although he knew he was actually sabotaging Germany's war effort. And he told some of his friends, he said, I know the war is lost, but I'm still going to win my war.
When the railways were bombed, Eichmann decided to dispatch the Jews by foot.
I wanted to show the Allies my hand, as it were, to tell them, you smashed our transportation routes, but we will carry on in the most elegant manner. I was responsible for the march, I admit it. As it turned out, the march was more trouble than if I had sent 100 or 500 trains to Auschwitz.
So began the notorious 120-mile death march of 50,000 Jews to the Austrian border. Of the first group on the march, 7,000 collapsed from fatigue and were shot. 1,000 died from hunger.
Seit nahezu 2 Monaten stehen die Verteidiger von Budapest von ihren Verbindungen abgeschnitten in heldenmütigem Kampf.
Eichmann's remaining plans were thwarted by the swift advance of the Soviet army on Budapest.
Wo bolschewistische Panzer sich zeigen, nehmen deutsche und ungarische Flakbatterien sie unter Feuer.
With his world collapsing around him, Eichmann quickly left the capital.
I left Budapest at 3 p.m. on Christmas Eve. As my Mercedes raced westwards, the road was already under Russian artillery fire. A great flood of refugees streaming towards Vienna had choked the highway. Now it was suddenly empty. It was as if the road had died.
When Eichmann returned to Berlin, he found a city in ruins and his status changed. In his own building, people were beginning to avoid him. Already there was a feeling that Eichmann would be singled out when surrender came. In the eyes of his comrades, he was turning into a leper. Though denying all guilt, Eichmann began destroying evidence of his actions. On his instructions, most of his archives were burnt. In Berlin, those that had cheered yesterday for Hitler were now burning his picture. The good times were over. Eichmann went into hiding. Finally, the war had come to an end. But as millions rejoiced, others started counting the cost. More than 55 million people, mostly civilians, had died. And in the cities and the ghettos, in the forests, the gas chambers and the camps, nearly 6 million Jews had met their deaths. But Adolf Eichmann was still alive and well. And living a new life in Buenos Aires. In his memoirs, Eichmann pictures himself as a praised hero right to the end.
My immediate superior, General Müller, said to me, if we had 50 Eichmanns, we could have won the war. When I realized the necessity for a final solution, I carried it through with all the fanaticism that an old Nazi would expect of himself, and that my superiors undoubtedly expected of me. They found me to be the right man in the right place.
Eichmann did not admit guilt. Even in the shadow of the gallows, there was no remorse.
Jawohl, weil ich einen Eidbruch als das schlimmste Verbrechen und Vergehen betrachte, dessen sich ein Mensch überhaupt schuldig werden kann.
פשע גדול יותר מרצח של 6 מיליון אנשים, ובתוך זה 1.5 מיליון ילדים, נכון?
Nein, das natürlich nicht, aber damit bin ich ja nicht befasst worden. Ich bin mit der Vernichtung nicht beschäftigt gewesen. Wäre ich mit der Vernichtung beauftragt worden, dann würde ich mich wahrscheinlich erschossen haben um jene Zeit, denke ich.
This was the ever-repeated line of his defense and the spirit of his prison memoirs. But Eichmann's summary of his life when he was still a free man was far different.
I worked relentlessly to kindle the fire. I was not just the recipient of orders. Had I been that, I would have been an imbecile. I was an idealist.
הנה אני אתן לך את כתב היד שלך.
During the final sessions of his trial, Adolf Eichmann was confronted with the memoirs he dictated to Wilhelm Sassen in Argentina in 1957. It was only then that he expressed any contrition, hoping perhaps to escape the hangman.
Gut, nachdem ich aufgefordert worden bin, von Ihnen, Herr Präsident, hier eine klare Antwort zu geben, dann muss ich erklären, dass ich diesen Mord, diese Vernichtung an die Juden für eines der kapitalsten Verbrechen innerhalb der Menschheitsgeschichte betrachten.
When he wrote his his memories, there, of course, he tried consistently to say, I was a minor officer, I was a small cog in a machine, I had to carry out orders, I never liked the killing of Jews, but I had no choice. On the other hand, when he spoke to Sassen, he, I imagine, said what he really felt. And amongst other things, this Sassen asked him, tell me, Mr. Eichmann, do you ever feel sorry for what you have done? And he said, yes, I feel sorry for one thing, that I wasn't hard enough, that I wasn't tough enough, that I didn't fight these damn interventionists enough. And now you see the result, the creation of the State of Israel and the re-emergence of that race there.
After 14 weeks of argument and months of deliberation, Eichmann was sentenced to death on the 11th of December, 1961. It was during the months awaiting his appeal that Eichmann wrote his prison memoirs. His appeal to the Supreme Court was rejected, and on the 31st of May 1962, he was told that the Israeli president had turned down his wife's plea for clemency. Eichmann asked for a bottle of red wine, but refused efforts to reconcile him to religion. When he was brought to the execution chamber, he still showed no remorse and refused to be blindfolded. His last words were,
I had to obey the rules of war and my flag.
Adolf Eichmann was hung at midnight on the 31st of May, 1962. And in the early hours of the morning, his body was cremated and his ashes scattered at sea. It had been 25 years since Eichmann had traveled the same waters, in search of the final solution.
Unlike Eichmann, the fate of a number of his Nazi colleagues was decided years earlier at the Nuremberg war trials, which began in November 1945. In just over a minute, the first of the trials, which involved 21 criminals, including Goering, Hess and Ribbentrop, is examined in detail, from the charges and the courtroom drama to the final judgments. The 12 subsequent trials, set against the backcloth of the emerging Cold War, are also assessed with archive footage and expert analysis.